I woke up with a pain in my lower back. No surprise after 40 years of driving a truck. My body is like a map of the roads I've traveled all my life. Every vertebrae, every joint reminds me of the hours waiting to load in Nebraska or the nighttime drives through the Rocky Mountains. My 67 is not just a number, but years spent away from home so that this very home could exist. Getting out of bed, the first thing I did was look at Miriam's picture. 10 years have passed and I still talk to her in the mornings. A strange habit for an old man. But it helps me not to feel empty in a house that now seems too big for one person. "Another day, dear," I murmured, running my finger along the frame. "Let's see what it brings us." Miriam looked up at me from the picture taken on our 30th anniversary. Her hair was already gray, but her smile was still as bright as the day we'd first met at Jenny's Cafe in Lakewood. I was passing through, stopping for a bite to eat, and she was working there as a waitress. I stayed in town a week longer than planned and then came back a month later with a ring. As I was making coffee, I caught myself reliving our story again. We married quickly. I was 24. She was 22. A year later, Rickson was born, named after my father. I remember holding him, tiny, in my arms, and vowing that he would never know want as I did, growing up in a family of 5 children where every dollar counted twice. I grinned, looking at my calloused hands clutching the mug. Those hands had spun the truck's steering wheel hundreds of thousands of miles so Rickson could have everything I'd ever dreamed of at his age. New sneakers every year, not my older brother's worn-out shoes, a private room with a computer, not a couch in the living room, college without student loans that would take half his life to pay off. Miriam often said I spoiled the boy too much, but isn't that what we work for? So that our children could be better off than we were? She was a junior high school teacher, a more stable job than mine, though with less pay. She was home when I was traveling across the country for months at a time. She was the one who helped with homework, went to parent-teacher conferences and school plays. And me? I was the shadow showing up at home for a few days, bringing gifts and stories of faraway places. But I was also the one who provided a roof over my head and food on the table. I was the one who set aside every extra dollar for my son's education. I stepped out onto the porch with a mug of coffee. My house stands on the outskirts of Lakewood. Nothing fancy, but it's ours. I mean, it's all mine now. It's 2 stories high, with a little garden that Miriam loves so much. Since her death, I've been trying to keep the garden in order, though I'm not doing so well. In the mailbox, I found some bills and flyers. Nothing from Rickson, but I didn't expect any. Our conversations in recent years had been reduced to occasional phone calls on holidays, when he seemed to be on duty rather than feeling the urge to talk to his father. I remember when things started to change. Rickson was about 16 and already looking at colleges. Miriam insisted that we send him to a private school downtown for his last 2 years. There were better teachers and a better chance of getting into a good university. This meant he got to know kids from more affluent families. Doctors, lawyers, businessmen. I first noticed this at an open day. I'd come straight from my flight before I'd even had a chance to change. Standing in my tattered jacket among men in business suits, I watched Rickson introduce me to his new friends. "My father, he's in transportation," he said evasively, avoiding the word trucker. I didn't pay much attention to it at the time. Teenagers are always embarrassed by their parents, right? But it was a start. Gradually, Rickson invited his friends home less and less often, preferring to spend time at their house. When I asked why, he said they had pools, home theaters, and other amenities that we didn't have in our modest home. Miriam saw this alienation, but advised me not to pressure the boy. "He's looking for himself, Ijar. That's normal. The important thing is that he knows we're always there for him." When it came time to choose a college, Rickson enrolled at a prestigious university 3 hours away from Lakewood. I still remember Miriam and I sitting at the kitchen table looking at the numbers. 4 years of tuition, living expenses, books. The sum was astronomical, but we had savings. I took extra flights, often sacrificing sleep. Miriam gave extra lessons after school. We made it through. The day we drove him to campus was both joyful and sad at the same time. I helped carry boxes to his dorm room while Miriam carefully arranged his things. His roommate turned out to be a guy named Bentley, the son of some financier from Boston. I noticed Rickson look a little embarrassed when Bentley asked what I did for a living. "Logistics," he answered quickly before I could open my mouth. Miriam squeezed my hand under the table during lunch in the student cafeteria. Her eyes said, "Don't mind him. He's just nervous in a new environment." College changed Rickson even more. He started talking differently, dressing differently. During summer vacation, he spent more time with his new friends than he did with us. He found an internship at an accounting firm and was home less and less often. When Miriam got sick in his third year, I thought it would bring us closer together. Pancreatic cancer was a diagnosis that sounded like a verdict. I took a vacation to be with her. Rickson would visit on weekends, but always rush back to campus. "I have exams, Dad. I can't miss class." I understood him. I really did. Education came first. Wasn't that what Miriam and I had taught him all his life? But part of me wanted to scream, "Your mother's dying." What the hell are exams? Miriam was fading fast. She'd talked about Rickson a lot in recent weeks, worried that he was distancing himself from me. "He's a good boy, Ejar." Just confused. "Promise me you'll be patient with him." I promised, and tried to keep that promise after she died. I still do, though it gets harder every year. Rickson graduated magna cum laude. I sat in the auditorium during the graduation ceremony, fighting back tears of pride and sadness. Miriam should have been here to see it. After the ceremony, I hugged him and told him my mom would have been proud of him. He nodded but quickly pulled away to take pictures with his friends. At the banquet for graduates and their families, I sat at a table with the parents of his classmates. They talked about their careers, travel, real estate. I was mostly silent. What could I tell them? About how I once got stuck in a snowstorm in Montana for 3 days? About how I know every roadside diner from Maine to California? I saw Rickson look at me anxiously, afraid I'd say the wrong thing. He had moved to downtown Lakewood after graduation, finding a job at a large accounting firm. It seemed like we should see each other more often now that we lived in the same city. But our meetings were limited to rare lunches at restaurants, always his choice, always in places where I felt uncomfortable in my casual clothes. I continued to work, even though I could have retired. The house was paid off, savings allowed me to live modestly but without want. However, working gave me a purpose, a reason to get up in the morning. Plus, I was taking shorter routes, so I wouldn't be gone for long periods of time. One day I decided to stop by Rickson's unannounced. I bought his favorite apple pie at the bakery and went to his apartment. The door was opened by a girl tall, slender, with straight blonde hair and a wary look. "Who are you here to see?" she asked in the tone one uses with unfamiliar merchants who suddenly appear on the doorstep. "I'm Rickson's father," I answered, extending my hand. "Ejar Hambleton." Her eyebrows raised slightly as if she'd been expecting someone else. "Oh, hello. I'm Ermeline Fairchild." She shook my hand with her fingertips. "Rickson will be home from work soon. Come on in." Rickson's apartment looked like it had been taken straight out of a catalog, spotless, stylish, with not a single personal item in sight. There weren't even any pictures. Not one picture of Miriam, not one picture of our family. We sat in awkward silence while Ermeline made tea. I learned that she worked in marketing for a pharmaceutical company, that she and Rickson had been dating for 8 months, and that her family owned a chain of organic grocery stores across the state. When Rickson returned, his surprise at seeing me was quickly replaced by irritation, though he tried to hide it. Dad? What are you doing here?" "I was in town, thought I'd stop by. Brought a pie." I pointed to the box on the table, which Ermeline hadn't even opened. "You could have called first," he said, loosening his tie. "We actually have plans tonight." I felt like an intruder in my own son's life. "Dinner with his boss," he explained. "An important event for his career." "Of course I understand. I won't intrude." I stood up, trying not to show how hurt I was by his words. Rickson walked me to the door while Ermeline disappeared into the bedroom. "Look, Dad, I appreciate you stopping by, but next time please call." I nodded, looking at my son, shaven, combed, in an expensive suit. He looked like a man from another world. In a way, he was. It was 3 months before I heard from him again. He called on Sunday morning, his voice sounding unusually excited. "Dad, I've got news. Ermeline and I are engaged. The wedding will be next spring." I congratulated him, trying to sound excited. "My boy's getting married. Miriam would be so happy." "That's wonderful, son. I'm happy for you." "Yes, Ermeline's parents are insisting on a big ceremony. You know, well, they have a certain status in the community." I knew what he was getting at. A big wedding means big expenses, and while it's traditional for the bride's family to pay for the festivities, I knew Rickson wouldn't want to look like he couldn't contribute. Son, I want to help. Tell me how much you need, and I'll do what I can. A pause followed. Then he said an amount that took my breath away, but I didn't show it. All right, I can do it. For you and Ermeline's sake. He thanked me, sounding almost like the old Rickson, my boy, who had once shown me his school projects with delight. For a moment, I thought this wedding might be a new beginning for us. Maybe by becoming a husband, he would realize the value of family. Maybe someday he would have children of his own and see the world through my eyes. I'd like to meet Ermeline's parents, I said. Maybe we could have a family dinner. Again, the pause, longer this time. Sure, Dad. I'll organize something. Listen, I gotta run. I'll talk to you later, okay? But I knew my son. I knew what his talk to you later really meant. And as I looked at Miriam's picture, I couldn't help but think that she would have known how to bridge that gap between us. I, on the other hand, could only feel it growing wider every day. The meeting with Ermeline's family was scheduled at the Laurel Leaf restaurant, one of those places in downtown Lakewood that I would never willingly enter. To avoid embarrassing my son, I bought a new suit at the mall. The saleswoman spent a long time picking out a tie for me, explaining about shades and textures. I nodded, though I didn't care. In 40 years as a trucker, I'd only worn a tie a few times, and all of them had been to funerals. I arrived in my pickup 20 minutes before the appointed time and sat in the parking lot for about 10 minutes, gathering my wits. Finally, I got out of the car, pulled on my jacket, and headed for the entrance. The maitre d' gave me a look that I couldn't interpret as anything but appraising and asked about reservations. Fairchild, I said, and he immediately changed his face. Of course, sir. The other guests have already arrived. Let me show you out. They were indeed already there, sitting at a round table in the far corner of the room. Rickson saw me first, and I noticed a fleeting look of alarm on his face before he rose with a strained smile. Dad, you're just in time. His tone suggested it was a surprise. I'd always been a punctual person. My job just didn't allow for tardiness. But I guess Rickson expected me to be late or otherwise violate etiquette. Meet Ermeline's parents, Bartholomew and Cordelia Fairchild. Bartholomew Fairchild, a tall man with silvery temples and an impeccably groomed beard, barely stood up to shake my hand. His grip was weak, as if he was afraid of getting dirty. Cordelia, a frail woman with the same blonde hair as her daughter, only cut shorter, nodded without getting up. Nice to meet you, I said, trying to sound friendly. Heard a lot about you from Rickson. It was a lie. Rickson's told me almost nothing about them except that they owned a chain of organic grocery stores. Likewise, Bartholomew replied in a tone that made it clear that there was nothing mutual about it. I sat down next to Rickson, across from Ermeline, who gave me a polite but detached smile. Dash, Mr. Hambleton. Cordelia said, Rickson said you work in transportation? I cast a quick glance at my son. Transportation again. He was clearly avoiding the word trucker. Yes, ma'am. I'm a truck driver, I said bluntly. Almost 43 years on the road. How interesting, she said the word like she was describing an unusual disease. And you're still, working? Yes, although now I take mostly short routes. At my age, it's hard to spend weeks away from home. I see, she clearly didn't understand. And how did you meet the late Mrs. Hambleton? Miriam was a waitress at the cafe where I had lunch on one of my trips. I smiled, remembering that day. She was the most beautiful girl I had ever seen. Cordelia and Bartholomew exchanged glances. I'd seen those looks before. They said how cute in that tone that people usually say how pathetic. The waiter brought the menu and I immediately felt out of place. The names of the dishes were in French, with no translation, and the prices. One dish cost what I usually spend on groceries for a week. Have you ever tasted foie gras, Mr. Hambleton? Ermeline asked, looking at me over her menu. No, miss, I haven't, I answered honestly. Oh, it's a real delicacy. You should try it, Dad, Rickson interjected, but I could hear the tension in his voice. He was afraid I'd say the wrong thing, order the wrong dish, use the wrong fork. I'll trust your choice, son, I said, closing the menu. Bartholomew ordered a bottle of wine without asking about my preferences. I wasn't much of a wine connoisseur, though. My choice was usually a bottle of beer after a long day on the road. So, Rickson told me that you were going to have the ceremony at the Wilhelmina? I asked, trying to keep the conversation going. Oh yes, Cordelia perked up. It's the most prestigious venue in Lakewood. The governor and his wife got married there. We had to book a year and a half in advance. So you planned the wedding before you were even engaged? I couldn't contain my surprise. There was that exchange of glances between the Fairchilds again. Marawatu. We always knew our Ermeline would only choose the best, Cordelia said with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. So yes, we've reserved a few dates. A little forethought never hurts. The appetizers arrived, tiny portions on huge plates. I tried to copy the way others use cutlery, but I still felt clumsy. Rickson cast anxious glances at me now and then. Huh. Rickson said you live on the north side of town? Bartholomew asked in a tone of small talk. Yes, near the old factory. Miriam and I bought the house when Rickson was 2. Oh yes, that neighborhood, he said as if it were a slum. We're thinking of buying land there. With the expansion of the city, that area will soon be a prime location for development. I tensed up. He was talking about the place where I'd lived most of my life as a piece of real estate for speculation. Good people there, I said. Working families. No doubt, he nodded, clearly uninterested in pursuing the subject. Ermeline, dear, tell Mr. Hambleton about your work. Ermeline launched into a monologue about marketing strategies and some medical products, half of which I couldn't even pronounce. I nodded, pretending to understand. Sounds impressive, I said when she was done. Yes, Ermeline was recently promoted, Rickson said proudly. She's in charge of the entire department now. And you, Mr. Hambleton, Cordelia interjected, are you planning to retire anytime soon? I felt Rickson tense beside me. Not yet, I answered. I like my job. Besides, I'd be bored out of my mind if I retired. But at your age, you must have some hobbies, right? Golf, maybe? Traveling? She said it like she couldn't imagine life without those things. I've been traveling all my life, ma'am. I grinned, seen almost every state from the cab of a truck. And golf. No, that ain't for me. I'm more of a fishing man. Ah, fishing, Bartholomew said with the same intonation as his wife. You know we have a cabin on Lake Champlain. It's great fishing there, but I prefer to hire a guide. Those boats, baits, so much hassle. I swallowed the comment that it's those hassles that are the beauty of fishing. Instead, I just nodded. The main courses were as tiny as the appetizers. I tried my best to eat right, but I noticed Rickson flinch when I picked up the wrong fork. He gently nudged another device toward me, and I replaced it, feeling my cheeks burn with shame. So, Bartholomew said when the meal was over, let's talk about the wedding. Cordelia and I have made a preliminary estimate. He pulled out a folder. Who the hell carries folders to dinner? And laid out a spreadsheet of numbers in front of us. I gulped, looking at the totals. As you can see, the main expenses are the Wilhelmina rental, the catering from Le Chateau, and of course the dress from Vivienne Westwood. He spoke as if I was supposed to know all those names. Dad, Ermeline interrupted him quietly. Maybe we shouldn't discuss all the details right now. Why not? He looked at me. Mr. Hambleton wants to be involved in arranging his son's wedding, doesn't he? Of course, I nodded. I want Rickson and Ermeline to have a special day. That's fine. Rickson said you'd be willing to contribute to the funding. Cordelia and I are taking care of most of the expenses, of course, but traditionally the groom's family pays for the rehearsal dinner, the alcohol at the reception, and the honeymoon. I looked at the amount opposite each of those items and felt my mouth go dry. It was a lot more than I'd expected, even considering that Rickson had already quoted an impressive figure. Well, I said, trying to stay calm. I'll do everything I can to make my son happy. Rickson gave me a grateful look, but I could see the relief in it too. He'd been afraid I'd refuse or haggle. Great, Bartholomew closed the folder. Then it's settled. Oh yes, one more thing, the dress code. The ceremony will be formal, so a tuxedo will be required. Do you have a tuxedo, Mr. Hambleton? No, I answered honestly. But I can rent one. Minus rent? Cordelia said the word as if I'd suggested wearing a potato sack. No, that won't do. You'd have to have it customized. Rickson can recommend a tailor. I nodded, not wanting to cause trouble. It was another unexpected expense. But for my son's sake, I was willing to do it. Speaking of guests, Cordelia continued, we've made a preliminary list. About 250 people from the bride's side. How about you, Mr. Hambleton? I wondered. Who could I invite? A few old trucker friends? Neighbors? Most of the relatives were either dead or we'd long since lost touch. Not many, I said vaguely. Maybe 20 people. Only 20? Cordelia seemed surprised but not disappointed. Well, that makes seating easier. Dessert passed in a discussion of details that seemed unnecessary to me. The color of the napkins, the type of floral arrangements, the music. Again, I just nodded, letting them decide. After all, I didn't know anything about these things. When dinner was over, Bartholomew insisted on paying the bill, though I offered to split it. As I walked out of the restaurant, I noticed the parking attendant wrinkle his nose when I asked for my old pickup to be pulled up. The Fairchild's gleaming Lexus was parked next to it. Dad, Rickson, took me aside while the others waited for their cars. Thanks for agreeing to all this. I know it's a lot for you. Nothing is a lot to you, son, I replied, trying to hide my bitterness. I want you to be happy. I appreciate that, I really do. He patted my shoulder awkwardly. Look, Ermeline and I were thinking, maybe you should bring someone with you to the wedding. A partner? I stared at him. Partner? You mean, like date? Well, yeah, he shrugged. It's been 10 years since Mom died. Would it be okay if you started dating someone? I felt a stab of pain. Did he really think I could replace Miriam so easily? Or was he just embarrassed that his father would come alone? I'll think about it, I lied. My pickup pulled up, and I said goodbye to the Fairchild family. Cordelia barely nodded. Bartholomew shook my hand with his trademark languid handshake, and Ermeline gave me the same polite smile she'd given me earlier in the evening. It was a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Hambleton, she said. We're so glad you're supporting our plans, I nodded, not trusting my voice, and got into the car. Looking in the rearview mirror, I saw Rickson say something to Ermeline, and they both laughed. I wondered if it was a laugh of relief that the meeting had ended without incident, or were they laughing at me? On the way home, I thought about Miriam. What would she say about this family that would soon be part of ours? She had always been a better judge of character than I was. She would see right through their fake politeness. At home, I sat down at the kitchen table and pulled out my checkbook. After carefully calculating, I realized I could pay for my portion of the wedding, but that would cut into my savings considerably. I'd have to put off the roof repair and probably keep working for another 2 or 3 years before I could afford to retire. But isn't that what I've been saving for all these years? Isn't that to give my son whatever he wants? Even if what he wants is a wedding that will impress his bride's family, not a celebration that reflects who we really are. I signed the first check, the deposit for the banquet hall, and put it in an envelope. I'll mail it to Bartholomew Fairchild in the morning, and hope that someday Rickson will realize that the price I pay is measured in more than just money. The next day I took the check to the post office and sent it by registered mail. Then I went to the bank and opened a special account for wedding expenses, transferring there a significant part of my savings. Now I just had to wait and hope that this wedding would really make my son happy. Deep down, I knew that Rickson was ashamed of me. My work, my accent, my mannerisms. I could see it in his eyes during dinner, in the way he flinched every time I opened my mouth. But I loved my son no matter what. And if paying for this ridiculously expensive wedding was a way to show him that love, I would do it without hesitation. Even if it meant I had to tighten my belt and keep working when my peers had long ago enjoyed a well-deserved vacation. After all, isn't that what fatherhood is all about? Sacrificing yourself for the happiness of your children? Wedding preparations were in full swing. I received regular bills from Bartholomew Fairchild for flowers, musicians, and a photographer, and each time the amount made me cringe, but I paid my share. Rickson called once a week not to talk to me, but to make sure the next installment was on time. Our conversations became short and businesslike, as if I were not my father but the bank from which he withdrew money. In one of those calls, Rickson mentioned a tasting of the wedding menu. The tasting is next week, Tuesday, 7 p.m., he said. Ermeline's parents would be there, of course. Good, I replied. Tuesday is my day off. I'll be there. An awkward pause followed. Dad. The tasting is for the bridegroom and bride's parents only. That's what the banquet hall manager said. I felt something tighten in my chest. But I'm a parent too, and I'm paying for part of the banquet. I know, Dad, Rickson sighed. But they're very strict about that. 4 people max. Why did I have to be the one left out? Did Rickson really prefer Fairchild Society to mine? I swallowed my resentment. I understand, I said. It's all right. I'm sure you'll choose something good. We ended the conversation, and I was left sitting with the phone in my hand, staring into the void. This was the first time I'd been openly excluded from wedding preparations, but I had a feeling it wouldn't be the last. And indeed, each week there were more and more such occasions. Costume choices for the groom and his friends? I wasn't invited. Visiting the wedding site? Rickson said I would see it on the day of the ceremony. Planning the bachelor party? Rickson embarrassingly explained that his friends would organize it themselves, but I kept paying. Every time Bartholomew sent me another bill with some accompanying note like, "Your share for the ice sculptures," I pulled out my checkbook and signed the check. For Rickson, always for Rickson. One morning I decided to stop by my son's house to give him tickets to a baseball game. It was our tradition when he was little to go to the local team's games together. I thought it might be a good way to spend some time together before we got married, maybe regain some of the closeness we once had. As I pulled up to his house, I noticed that not only his car was parked in the driveway, but also the Fairchild's SUV. I almost turned around, but decided that since I was there, I should hand over the tickets. After all, I'd purposely chosen a game that was still 2 weeks away. He'd have time to plan. I knocked and the door was opened by Irmeline. Her face expressed surprise, which she quickly masked with a polite smile. Dash Mr. Hambleton. What a surprise. Hello, Irmeline. Is Rickson in? I wanted to give him a message. Yes, of course. Come in, please. She stepped aside, letting me inside. My parents and I are just discussing some wedding details. I walked into the living room and saw Rickson sitting at the table with Bartholomew and Cordelia. They had some papers spread out in front of them, which they had hastily gathered up when I arrived. Dash, Dad. Rickson looked surprised and none too pleased. What are you doing here? I just stopped by to give you this. I held out the envelope with the tickets. I thought we could go together, like old times. Rickson took the envelope without even looking at the contents. Thanks, Dad. But you know, there's so much to organize before the wedding. I understand, I said. That's why I picked the game in 2 weeks, so you'd have time to plan. Bartholomew cleared his throat. Actually, Rickson, we have a meeting with the florist in 2 weeks, and it's not something that can be rescheduled. Right, Rickson agreed quickly. I'm sorry, Dad, but I'm really busy. I nodded, trying to hide my disappointment. Of course, I understand. Maybe some other time. Maybe, he said without much enthusiasm. I was about to leave when I noticed a stack of envelopes on the table. They were wedding invitations, elegant, gold embossed. I recognized them because I had paid to have them printed. One of the envelopes was open, and I caught a glimpse of the name on it, some colleague of Rickson's from his firm. Are you sending out invitations? I asked, pointing to the stack. Yes, Cordelia answered proudly. We just got them back from the printer. They're gorgeous, aren't they? I nodded, suddenly realizing that I hadn't seen my invitation. Maybe they were sending them out in batches, and mine was still in process? And my invitation? I began. Rickson and Irmeline exchanged quick glances. Cordelia suddenly found something interesting in her manicure, and Bartholomew coughed. Ejar, maybe we should talk in private, Rickson suggested, standing up. He led me to the backyard, a small lawn with a patio where there was a garden table and a few chairs. We sat down, and Rickson ran his hand nervously through his hair, a gesture he'd adopted from me, though he hardly realized it. Dad, listen, he began. Irmeline and I have been thinking a lot about the wedding, about what it should be. And we thought it would be better if you didn't come. I stared at him, not believing my ears. What? Get it right, he continued quickly. It's nothing personal. It's just, well, you know the kind of people who'll be at the wedding. Partners from my firm, clients, friends of the Irmeline family, important people on whom my career depends. So? I still didn't understand where he was going with this. Rickson sighed, obviously searching for words. Dad, you're a good man. You really are. But you don't fit into that circle. You don't know how to behave in this society. Remember dinner with Ermeline's parents? You used the wrong fork. You talked about your job as a trucker. I felt the blood rush to my face. Are you ashamed of me? Of your father? No, I mean. He hesitated. I just think it would be uncomfortable for you. You won't know any of the guests. You'll have to sit alone all night. I'll know you, I said quietly. And I'm your father. I should be at your wedding. Rickson shook his head. I've made my decision, Dad. I don't want you to come. It's my day, and I want it to be perfect. Perfect? I could feel the anger rising in me. And for this perfect day, I have to exclude your father, who, by the way, is paying for half of this damn wedding? I'll reimburse you, Rickson said quickly, in due course. When Ermeline and I get back on our feet, I laughed, but it wasn't funny. In time? Rickson, you make 3 times what I make, and I'm still paying for your wedding, a wedding I'm not even invited to. You don't understand, he sounded annoyed. Starting a family requires an investment. We'll have to buy a house, furnish it. Where do you think I started? I interrupted. When your mom and I got married, we had nothing but an old pickup truck and a mattress on the floor. And we made it, without anyone else's help. Times have changed, Dad. Things are different now. Yeah, I said bitterly. People used to be ashamed of their parents. Rickson jumped up, his face reddening. You're always like this, always making me feel guilty. I'm trying to build my life, my career, and you pull me back with your outdated notions. I stood up too, feeling my hands shaking. I'm pulling you back? Me, who worked my whole life so you could get an education, so that you could become whatever you wanted to be? I never asked you to follow in my footsteps, never imposed my lifestyle. I've always supported your decisions, even when they meant you'd be further and further away from me. And look where that got me, Rickson exclaimed. I have a good job, a beautiful fiancé, prospects you never even dreamed of. And you want to ruin it all by being at my wedding? The words hit me like a slap in the face. Ruin it? Yes. Rickson couldn't help himself. You have no idea what it looks like from the outside. My dad, who speaks with that country accent of his, telling stories about his cross-country trips like it's some kind of accomplishment. You're going to ruin our party. Don't come. I looked at my son, the stranger in an expensive shirt with perfect hair, and didn't recognize the boy I had once taught to ride a bike, who cried in my arms when he fell and shattered his knee, who proudly showed me his school awards, knowing that I would always be proud of him. Well, you made your choice, I said quietly, feeling empty inside. Yes, I did, Rickson said firmly, and I hope you honor it. I nodded, turned, and walked toward the exit. As I passed through the living room, I noticed the Fairchilds and Ermeline trying to pretend they hadn't been eavesdropping, but their tense postures gave them away. No one said a word as I walked past them and out of the house. I sat in the car for a few minutes without starting the engine. My hands were still shaking, and I gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to calm myself down. In the rearview mirror, I saw my face, aged, tired, with deep wrinkles around my eyes from decades spent in the sun and wind in the cab of the truck. I looked like a man who had worked hard all his life, and I wasn't ashamed of it. I'd never been ashamed of it. Until today. Until my own son made me feel like I should be ashamed of who I was. I started the car and drove home. On the way, I thought about Miriam, about what she would say now. She had always been the peacemaker in our family, finding ways to smooth over conflicts. But even she would be shocked that our son didn't want his father at his own wedding. At home, I sat down at the kitchen table and pulled out all the papers related to the wedding. Bills, receipts, bank statements. I spread them out in front of me, looking at the amounts I'd already spent. 5-digit figures. Money I'd been saving for years, denying myself many things. Money that was supposed to provide me with a peaceful old age, and all for a son who was ashamed to be seen with me in public. I remembered his words. You'll spoil our party, don't come. Every word was like a knife in my heart. But what hurt me even more was his lack of understanding of my response. Well, you made your choice. He thought I was resigned, that I accepted his decision to exclude me from the most important day of his life. What he didn't realize was that choices have consequences. Always. I picked up my phone and opened the banking app. All payments for the wedding were coming from a separate account I'd set up specifically for that purpose. I looked at the balance, an impressive amount, enough for a year of my life if spent sparingly. Then I opened the calendar. The wedding was less than a month away. Most of the bills had already been paid, but final payments for the banquet hall, catering, and a few other services were due 3 days before the ceremony. Those were the terms of the contracts I was signing. It wasn't too late to cancel. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a plan begin to form in my head. It would be a drastic step, perhaps an unforgivable one. But wasn't what Rickson had done unforgivable? Hadn't he been the first to break our bond, abandoning me to his ambition and the snobbery of the Fairchild family? I sat up late into the night, pondering every detail. By morning, I knew what I was going to do. It was not an impulsive decision, but a carefully considered choice. Just as Rickson had made his choice, so I would make mine. I'm not going to act right away. I'll give Rickson a chance to reconsider, to change his mind. But if nothing changes before the wedding day, if he doesn't apologize and invite me, well, then he'll see what it means to make a choice and face the consequences. For the first time in a long time, I felt something resembling peace. The decision had been made. Now all that was left to do was wait and prepare. I put all the papers in a neat stack and put them away in my desk drawer. Then I opened my computer, an old but working computer, and started looking for information on how to cancel wire transfers and check payments. If Rickson thought he could just cut me out of his life by continuing to use my money, he was deeply mistaken. Deeply wrong. I woke up before dawn on the day of Rickson's wedding. I lay awake all night, staring at the ceiling, going over the events of the last few weeks in my head. My son had called me several times since our conversation, but not to apologize or change his mind. He called to remind me about the final payments for the wedding. "Did you remember to wire the money for the banquet hall?" he asked in lieu of a greeting. Ermeline's parents want to make sure everything is paid for. Each time I replied that I remembered my obligations. And I did remember, just not in the way he expected. Over the past month, Rickson had more than one chance to change his mind. I waited to see if maybe he would call and say, "Dad, I was wrong. Of course you should be at my wedding." But that didn't happen. Instead, I received dry messages reminding me of payments and telling me where and when to wire money. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at Miriam's picture. "What would you say, dear?" I muttered. "Am I doing the right thing?" There was no answer, of course, but I knew my wife. She always believed in consequences. "Actions have consequences, Ijar," she used to say, "and children should understand that. Now our son is no longer a child. He is a grown man who has made a conscious choice to exclude his father from the most important day of his life, while expecting his father to continue to pay for that day." I got up, took a shower, and got dressed. Not in the tuxedo I'd bought for the wedding, but in regular jeans and a shirt. Then I went down to the kitchen, brewed some coffee, and pulled out my laptop. It was time to execute the plan I had so carefully laid out. The first thing I did was log into my online banking. I had canceled all the automatic payments related to the wedding over the past few weeks and transferred the money back into my main account. The last step left was to cancel the final payments that were due today. I opened the scheduled transfer section. 3 large payments for the banquet hall, catering, and decorations were scheduled for 9 in the morning. It was now only 6:30. I still had time. My finger hovered over the cancel button. I took a deep breath. This wasn't an impulsive decision. I'd been thinking about it for weeks, weighing the pros and cons. And yet, as I pressed that button, I felt the weight of my choice. One by one, I canceled all 3 payments. The system asked for confirmation for each, and each time I clicked yes. I then transferred the funds to another account at a different bank that I had opened specifically for this purpose. The money was now unavailable for automatic debit. I then picked up the phone and started making calls. The first was the Wilhelmina Banquet Hall. "Good morning, is Wilhelmina. How can I help you?" a friendly female voice answered. "Good morning," I said. "My name is Ijar Hambleton. I'm paying for today's Hambleton Fairchild wedding." "Oh yes, Mr. Hambleton. We're just expecting your final payment this morning. That's what I'm calling about. I'm afraid there won't be a payment." There was a pause. I beg your pardon? I'm canceling my financial support for this wedding, I said calmly. The payment you are expecting will not be forthcoming. But Mr. Hambleton, the woman's voice became anxious. The wedding is today. The guests will begin to arrive in a few hours. Everything is ready. I understand, I replied, and I'm sorry for what happened, but I'm no longer involved in this event. Sir, I'll have to contact the groom. Of course, I said. That's your right. I ended the conversation feeling my heart pounding in my chest, but it was too late to back out. I kept calling. The catering company, the set design firm, the photographer, the orchestra. Everyone I had to make final payment to today. Each conversation was a variation of the first. First bewilderment, then alarm, then a promise to contact Rickson or the Fairchilds. I calmly confirmed that I was fully aware of the consequences of my actions. By 8 a.m., I had finished all my calls and shut down my computer. I then went to the garage, got in my pickup truck, and pulled into the driveway. I knew a storm was about to hit, and I didn't want to be home when Rickson realized what had happened. I drove past Wilhelmina's, a luxurious country mansion turned banquet hall. There was already activity there. Delivery trucks, uniformed men scurrying back and forth. They didn't yet know that the wedding they were preparing for was about to be jeopardized. I felt no gloating, only deep, pervasive pain. My son is getting married today, and I won't get to see it, not by choice, but because he's decided I'm not good enough for his new world, that I might ruin his perfect day with my presence. The phone rang when I was 15 minutes out of town. Rickson, I didn't answer it. A minute later, a message came through. Dad, call me back right away. It's urgent. I put my phone on the passenger seat with the screen facing down and continued on my way. Today I was driving to a special place, a small lake an hour outside of Lakewood, where Miriam and I spent our honeymoon. We didn't have money for a lavish wedding or an exotic trip. We rented a tiny cabin on the beach for a week and were immensely happy. The phone wouldn't stop ringing. Rickson, a number I didn't recognize. Probably the Fairchilds. Rickson again. I turned on the radio to drown out the calls. An old song that Miriam and I loved was playing. I started to sing along, feeling tears come to my eyes. Later, I parked on the side of the road and checked my phone. 27 missed calls and 32 messages. I opened the first of them. Dad, what the hell is going on? I'm getting a call from the banquet hall saying you canceled a payment. Next, call me back immediately. And then, do you realize what you're doing? You're ruining everything. I scrolled through the rest of the messages. They got more and more desperate, with caps lock and lots of exclamation points. In the last few, Rickson was already begging me to respond, telling me that everything was falling apart, that Ermeline's parents were furious, that his fiancée was crying. I felt a prick of guilt. Ermeline wasn't to blame for Rickson's decision, but then I remembered the way she'd looked at me during dinner with her parents, how she never tried to take my side when Rickson was distancing himself from me, how she probably supported his decision not to invite me to the wedding. The last message was from an unfamiliar number. Mr. Hambleton, this is Bartholomew Fairchild. What you are doing is completely inexcusable. We're going to sue you for breach of contract and damages. I grinned. What agreements? We didn't have any written contracts, only verbal promises, which Rickson had broken first when he decided to exclude me from his wedding. I turned my phone off and continued on my way to the lake. The day was clear, sunny, perfect for a wedding. I wondered what was going on at the Wilhelmina right now. Are the Fairchilds trying to salvage the situation by paying for everything out of their own pockets? Or is the wedding canceled, with guests turning around at the door? Strangely, I felt no satisfaction or schadenfreude, only fatigue and sadness. Arriving at the lake, I parked in a small lot near the beginning of the trail. Getting out of the car, I took a deep breath of fresh air. Nothing had changed here in all these years. The same pine trees framing the shore, the same crystal clear water reflecting the sky. Miriam loved this place. We used to come here every year for our wedding anniversary until she got sick. I followed the familiar path to the small beach where our cabin had once stood. There was new construction there now, but the location was still the same. I sat down on a large boulder by the water's edge, the same one Miriam and I had sat on for hours talking about the future, about our dreams, about the baby we wanted. What happened, Miriam? I muttered, looking out at the water. Where did we go wrong with Rickson? Maybe we spoiled him too much. Maybe I'd been working too much and not being home enough. Or was it something else? A society that teaches children to be ashamed of their roots if they don't meet a certain standard. I pulled a small picture out of my pocket of the three of us when Rickson was about 10. We're on a fishing trip, all smiles, showing off the trout we caught. Rickson is looking at me with such adoration. When did that change? When did shame appear in his eyes instead of pride? I spent a few hours by the lake, just sitting and thinking. Remembering Miriam, our life together. The years when Rickson was little and the world seemed simpler. I didn't cry. The tears didn't come. Only a deep, silent pain that seemed to penetrate all the way to my bones. At some point, I pulled out my phone and turned it back on. The stream of calls and messages didn't stop. I flipped through them without reading them, then opened the last one from Rickson, sent 10 minutes ago. Dad, you ruined everything. The wedding's canceled. Ermeline's parents are furious. She won't stop crying. I will never forgive you for this. Never. I felt a strange calmness reading those words. Never forgive me? Well, I'm not sure I could forgive him either. For disowning me, for disowning who I am, for everything I've done for him. I tucked my phone back into my pocket, not answering. What could I say? I'm sorry I ruined your wedding, but you ruined our family first? It sounded petty, even if it was true. The sun was beginning to slip towards the horizon, coloring the lake in golden and orange hues. I thought of Miriam, of how much she loved sunsets here. Look, Ijar, she used to say, isn't it a miracle? Every day the sun gives us such a parting gift. I stood up and took a few steps toward the water. I took out of my pocket the small urn I always carried with me on special days. It contained a pinch of Miriam's ashes. According to her wishes, most of it was scattered over this lake, but I kept a small portion so that she would always be around. I miss you, darling, I whispered, especially today. Our son was getting married today, and neither of his parents were attending the ceremony. Miriam because illness had taken her, me because I was excluded from my own child's life. I opened the urn and let the wind carry a tiny pinch of ashes over the water. It was our ritual. My way of including Miriam in the important moments of life she had missed. I'm sorry for what happened, I said quietly, but I couldn't have done it any other way. He needs to realize that you can't just use people and then throw them away when they become inconvenient. The phone vibrated in my pocket again. This time it wasn't Rickson calling. The number was unfamiliar, but with a Lakewood area code. I answered, Mr. Hambleton? There was a man's voice. It was William Paxton, a friend of Rickson's. We'd met several times at barbecues at his house. I vaguely remembered the young man, one of Rickson's few friends, who always greeted me and showed interest in my work. Yes, I remember you, William. What's wrong? I thought you should know. The wedding has indeed been canceled. The banquet hall refused to perform the ceremony without full payment. The caterer didn't deliver the food. The musicians didn't show up. Guests were crowding the entrance, not realizing what was going on. It was total chaos. I remained silent, not knowing what to say. Rickson is in a terrible state, William continued. He told me what happened between you two, that he didn't invite you to the wedding, and that you canceled the payments. He made his own choice, I said quietly. I know, William sighed. And to be honest, a lot of us were shocked to hear that you weren't going to be at the wedding. Rickson always spoke of you with such respect, how supportive you were, how hard you worked to get him an education. It surprised me. So Rickson wasn't always ashamed of me, at least not in front of all his friends. Oh, but those Fairchilds, William continued with a clear disapproval in his voice. They looked down on him from the beginning. They didn't think he was good enough for their precious Ermeline. I think they were the ones who influenced his decision. That's no excuse, I said. Rickson's a grown man. He chose which side to take. Yes, you're right, William agreed. I just thought you should know that not everyone thinks what you did was wrong. Some of us understand, and even respect your decision. I thanked him for the call and said goodbye, feeling a strange mix of emotions. On the one hand, it was nice to know that not all of Rickson's friends were like the Fairchilds. On the other, it didn't change the nature of what had happened. The sun was almost down. I took one last look at the lake, said goodbye to Miriam, and walked back to the car. I had a long way to go home, and I wasn't sure I was ready for what might be waiting for me there. Maybe an angry Rickson. Maybe the police, if the Fairchilds decided to file a complaint. Or more likely, just an empty house and a silence that would now become even deeper and more permanent. I got behind the wheel, but I wasn't in a hurry to start the engine. Instead, I pulled an old envelope out of the glove compartment. In it was a letter Miriam had written for Rickson before she died, asking him to give it to her on her wedding day. I'd carried it around with me all these years, waiting for the right moment. Now that moment never seemed to come. I put the letter back in the glove compartment. Maybe someday Rickson would be ready to read it. Maybe never. Either way, it was out of my hands. I started the car and pulled onto the road leading back to Lakewood. My phone kept vibrating, but I wasn't paying attention to it anymore. No matter what happened next, I had done what I thought was right today. Yes, it was a hard choice, and the consequences will be long and painful. But sometimes principles are worth more than comfort or even family ties, especially when those bonds had already been broken by someone other than me. It's been a week since the failed wedding. I went back to my normal life. Work, home, work again. Rickson never called again. His last message was very clear. "I'll never forgive you for this." I didn't respond. What can I say? On Wednesday, I met William Paxton, the same friend of Rickson's who had called me on my wedding day. I stopped by the auto shop to change the oil in my pickup truck and saw him there. He was working as a mechanic, which I didn't know about before. Mr. Hambleton. He wiped his hands with a rag and came over to me. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Hello, William," I shook his hand. "I didn't know you worked here." "This is my 3rd year," he smiled. "My family owns this shop. How are you?" "I've been better," I said honestly. "And you? How's it going with—" I hesitated, not knowing if I should ask about Rickson. William understood my hesitation. "Would you like some coffee?" he offered. I was just about to take a break. "I can tell you what happened at the wedding, or rather, what was supposed to be a wedding." We were sitting in a little coffee shop across from the machine shop. William, to my surprise, turned out to be a pleasant conversationalist, straightforward, unpretentious, with a good sense of humor. Not at all like the pompous young men Rickson usually talked to. "It was a nightmare," William began, sipping his coffee. "I arrived about an hour before the ceremony started. Even then, something was wrong. The banquet hall staff seemed tense, running back and forth with their phones. Rickson was in one of the changing rooms, so I went in to see him. He was pale as a sheet, checking his phone the whole time." William shook his head, remembering. "He told me that there had been some problems with the payment, but that it would be resolved soon." I didn't pay much attention to it. There's no telling what kind of bureaucratic nonsense can happen. Then came Bartholomew Fairchild, you know him, the bride's father. He literally burst into the room, red with rage. "What the devil is going on?" he shouted at Rickson. "The manager says the payment hasn't gone through. The whole thing's going to blow if we don't pay right now." William portrayed Bartholomew's haughty tone so accurately that I grinned involuntarily. "Rickson tried to explain that you've canceled the payments, but he's sure it's some kind of mistake, that you'll fix it soon." Bartholomew responded with such a tirade. William shook his head. "I've never heard a grown man swear like that. He called you many unkind words. He said he knew from the beginning that you were unworthy of being part of their family." I listened without interrupting. It wasn't hard to picture Bartholomew in a rage. "Then Rickson started calling you. Again and again," William continued. "But you didn't answer. He left messages, but apparently there was no answer." Meanwhile, the guests were beginning to arrive. They were met at the entrance and asked to wait in the garden, saying that the ceremony was running a little late. William finished his coffee and called the waitress to order more. Cordelia Fairchild appeared as well. She was already in full parade, dress, hair, makeup, and she was as furious as her husband. She'd yelled at Rickson that he'd embarrassed their family, that their guests, people of a certain class, as she put it, would never forgive them for such an embarrassment. "And Irmeline?" I asked, suddenly feeling a prick of guilt. "How was she?" "Oh, she was—" William hesitated for words. "At first she was just crying. Then when it became clear that there would be no payment and the ceremony was in jeopardy, she started to scream too. Not at Rickson, but at her parents. demanding that they pay for everything. Said she wasn't going to let some dirty trucker, pardon the quote, ruin her perfect day. I nodded. That sounded quite Ermeline. Bartholomew refused to pay, William continued. Said he wasn't going to throw money away because of your, as he put it, petty revenge. He offered to reschedule the wedding for another day. But Ermeline was hysterical, screaming that all the invitations had been sent out, the guests were already here, her dress was already on, and she wasn't going to wait a minute longer. William sighed. Finally, the banquet hall manager made the final decision. Without full payment, there would be no ceremony. Period. They had already started removing chairs and arches for the ceremony when the guests were still arriving. I envisioned this scene, elegantly dressed people watching in bewilderment as the workers dismantled the wedding decorations. It must have looked surreal. Someone had to announce to the guests that there would be no wedding, William continued. Rickson couldn't bring himself to come out and say it. Bartholomew refused too, saying it wasn't his shame. In the end, the best man did it. Preston, you probably don't know him. He came out to the guests and said that due to unforeseen circumstances, the ceremony was canceled. People were shocked. There were questions, whispers, some demanded explanations. Others simply walked away in silence. And then, William shook his head, the strangest thing began. Father Ermeline suddenly announced that the wedding would take place after all. Not today, but very soon. And that the Fairchild family would throw a real party worthy of their daughter. Without certain elements to spoil it, I realized that by certain elements, I meant me. And probably now Rickson too. What happened next? I asked. Chaos, William answered simply. The guests were leaving, some demanding compensation for their time and travel. The banquet hall staff was removing all the festive paraphernalia. Ermeline's parents took her away. She was sobbing so hard she almost fainted. Rickson was left alone with us, his friends. We tried to comfort him, but he was, I don't even know how to describe it. Broken, humiliated, furious, all of it at once. William paused, fiddling with his cup. You know, Mr. Hambleton, I don't want to pick sides in your conflict with Rickson. It's a family matter. But I must say that many of us friends of his were shocked to learn that he didn't invite you to the wedding. It seemed, wrong, unfair, especially since you were paying for most of the festivities. I nodded, grateful for his honesty. What about the Fairchilds? I asked. Did they leave like that? Oh, yes, William grinned. They left the battlefield as soon as it became clear that reputational damage was inevitable. Cordelia had told Rickson before they left that they need to think seriously about Ermeline's future and her connection to a family that is so irresponsible. It sounded like a veiled threat to break off the engagement. I wondered if that was the case. And Rickson? Where is he now? I couldn't resist asking. He took a leave of absence from work, William answered. As far as I know, he's staying with his friend Preston. With Ermeline, well, it's hard to say. She hasn't broken off the engagement, but she's not actively communicating with him. Her parents insist that he prove himself before they start planning a wedding again. Prove himself? I asked. What does that mean? I think they want him to pay for the next wedding attempt. William shrugged. And maybe sue you for ruining the first one? I tensed. Do you think he'll do that? I don't know, William answered honestly. Rickson's not in a good place right now. He's angry, embarrassed, frustrated, and the Fairchilds are adding fuel to the fire, insisting that he must restore his honor. But to sue his own father? He shook his head. I don't know if it will come to that. We talked some more, and William went back to work, and I drove home, pondering everything I'd heard. The picture of the failed wedding in my mind was vivid and painful. I felt no satisfaction at what had happened, only sadness and a sense of finality. It was as if the last thread linking me to my son had been cut. The next day I received another report of the wedding fiasco, this time from Eleanor Greenwood, my neighbor who worked as a florist and was supposed to deliver flowers for the ceremony. Ejar, you wouldn't believe what went on there, she told me when she came in for a cup of tea. I arrived with a truck full of flowers and the place was falling apart. The manager of the banquet hall wouldn't let any of the suppliers near the building, demanding payment first. The caterer turned around and left. The photographer was arguing with someone on the phone. And the guests, my God, those poor people in evening gowns were wandering around the parking lot, not knowing what was going on. Eleanor, unlike William, was unaware of my role in the wedding's disruption. She thought I was simply uninvited because of some family disagreement. The bride was hysterical, she continued. I saw her being led out to the car, her dress wrinkled, her makeup smeared all over her face. She was yelling something about lawsuits and that someone would pay for the shame. Her mother walked beside her, just as furious, repeating, I always said that boy wasn't good enough for you, dear. Eleanor shook her head. And your son, Ijar. I hardly recognized him. He was standing out front, pale, phone in hand, looking like he'd been run over by a truck. I wanted to come over and say something comforting, but he looked right through me like he didn't see me. Poor boy. I listened to her story, feeling strangely numb. Poor boy. Yes, in a way, Rickson had indeed been a victim. His own pride, the Fairchild's snobbery, the circumstances. But he was also the cause of everything that had happened. His choices had led to these consequences. My musings were interrupted by the doorbell. I opened it and saw a messenger with an envelope. Mr. Ijar Hambleton, he asked. Please sign here. I signed the receipt and took the envelope. Judging by the logo on it, it was from Greenberg and Associates, one of the most prominent law firms in Lakewood. Eleanor, seeing the envelope, tactfully made her way home. I won't interfere with your business, Ijar. Come in for tea sometime. Left alone, I opened the envelope. Inside was an official letter on letterhead. I began to read, and with each line my heart beat heavier and heavier. Dear Mr. Hambleton, you are hereby notified that our firm is representing Mr. Rickson Hambleton in a case involving the intentional disruption of a wedding event scheduled for May 14th, 2025. Our client alleges that you, while responsible for payment for a number of services related to said event, intentionally canceled payments immediately prior to the ceremony, resulting in its cancellation and significant emotional and financial damages to our client and his fiancée, Ms. Ermeline Fairchild. As a result of your actions, our client has suffered the following damages: deposits paid to various service providers that have not been refunded, costs of invitations, printing and other preparatory materials, compensation to guests for transportation and other expenses. Significant moral damages, including damage to reputation. The total amount of damages is estimated at $150,000. We hereby offer you to settle this matter out of court by paying the above amount within 30 days of receipt of this notice. In the event of refusal or lack of response, we will be forced to go to court to recover the said amount, as well as additional costs of litigation. Sincerely, Jonathan Greenberg, senior partner of Greenberg and Associates. I reread the letter twice, unable to believe my eyes. $150,000. That was several times more than everything I'd spent on wedding preparations. It was more than all my savings. And to make matters worse, my son was actually suing me, or at least threatened to. He'd picked one of the most expensive law firms in town to intimidate me, to make me pay. I sat down at the kitchen table, placing the letter in front of me. The feeling of numbness was replaced by bitterness. Here he was, my son, the one I'd raised, the one I'd given everything I could. Now he's trying to squeeze the last of my money out of me, using expensive lawyers and threats. Bridges aren't just burned, they're destroyed, wiped out. There's not just a gap between us now, a chasm that can't be bridged. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number of my old friend Lawrence, who had once worked as a lawyer before retiring. Lawrence, it's Ijar. I need some advice. I briefly explained the situation and read out the letter. Lawrence listened in silence, only occasionally humming. Ijar, he said at last, this is intimidation, pure and simple. The sum is absurdly high. Yes, you canceled the payments, but you had no written contract obliging you to make them. The most they can realistically demand is the amount of expenses actually incurred, which can be proven. And even that is questionable given the circumstances. What should I do? I asked. Don't answer that letter, Lawrence advised. If they do sue, then hire a lawyer. But I doubt it will come to that. It's probably an attempt to scare you into paying without a trial. I thanked my friend and hung up. His words calmed me a little, but the bitterness remained. My son, my only child, threatened me with a lawsuit, demanded money I didn't have, tried to punish me for responding to his refusal by refusing the same. I picked up the letter again and looked closely at the signature. The handwriting wasn't Rickson's, probably a lawyer's secretary, but somewhere in there was my son, who had consented to the sending of this letter, who sat in the expensive lawyer's office and told me how his father had willfully ruined his wedding. Not a word about the fact that this father was excluded from the guest list, not a word about how the son was ashamed of him, disowned him in front of his new family. I folded the letter and tucked it away in my desk drawer. Whatever happened next, one thing was clear. My son had made his choice, and that choice didn't include me in his life, except as a source of money and now a target for lawsuits. Miriam would be heartbroken to see what our relationship had become, but maybe she would have understood. Maybe she'd even support me. After all, she was the one who always said that actions have consequences, and children should understand that. Now Rickson did, and so do I. The consequences of our election caught up with both of us, and the price was higher than either of us could have imagined. 4 months flew by. I sold the house in Lakewood, the same house where Miriam and I had lived most of our lives together, where we'd raised Rickson. It wasn't an easy decision, but it didn't make sense to stay there anymore. Too many memories, too many ghosts of the past. Besides, after the letter from Rickson's lawyers, I feared that the case would actually go to trial, and I wanted to be prepared financially. The trial, however, didn't happen. After consulting with Lawrence, I hired my own attorney, who sent a counter letter indicating that there was no legal obligation on my part and hinting at possible counterclaims. That's where things went quiet. Apparently, Rickson or the Fairchilds realized there would be no easy victory. I moved to Cedar Cove, a small coastal town about 3 hours from Lakewood. No one here knew me. No one whispered behind my back about the trucker who crashed his son's wedding. I bought a small house on the outskirts, a couple miles from the ocean. Nothing fancy, but it was enough for me. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a living room, and a tiny garden where I could fiddle with plants like Miriam had once loved. The job I'd left behind, at 67, it was time to go shopping. The money from the sale of the house in Lakewood, plus the savings I hadn't spent on Rickson's wedding, allowed me to live modestly but without want. I even bought a used boat. I'd always wanted to spend more time fishing. Life in Cedar Cove was slower, more measured. No one was in a hurry. No one judged you by the make of your car or the value of your watch. People said hello on the streets, even to strangers. Gradually, I began to get to know my neighbors, to make new acquaintances. I became especially close to Theodore Wheatley, an elderly former school teacher who lived across the street. We met when I helped him fix his porch after a storm. It turned out that Theodore was a widower, like me, and had recently moved here too, escaping the hustle and bustle of the big city. We found we had a lot in common, a love of fishing, simple food, and old westerns. "You know, Ejar," Theodore said to me one day as we sat on his porch with a beer, watching the sunset, "sometimes life gives us a second chance. Not the kind we expected, but a chance nonetheless." I nodded, understanding what he was talking about. For both of us, this move was a kind of reboot, an attempt to start over after losses and disappointments. Theodore had introduced me to the local fishing community, a group of retired men who regularly went out to sea in their boats. I joined their company, and for the first time in a long time, I felt that I belonged to something, that I was accepted for who I was. "What did you do before you retired, Ejar?" Harvey, one of the fishermen, asked me one day when we were hauling nets. "I was a trucker," I replied, expecting the usual polite nod and change of subject. "Really?" Harvey perked up. "My father was a trucker too. 40 years. Hell of a job." He told stories like that. "You must have seen a lot on the road too, huh?" So I started talking about the endless highways, the roadside diners, the sunsets over the desert, and the sunrises in the mountains. The people I met, the towns I passed through, and they listened with genuine interest, without condescension or contempt. They asked questions, shared their stories. For the first time in years, I talked about my work without feeling I had to apologize for it, without having to disguise it with euphemisms like transportation field. Here in Cedar Cove, being a trucker was no less honorable than being a teacher, carpenter, or fisherman. Gradually, I began to feel at home, made habits, rituals. Tuesdays, I played chess with Theodore. Thursdays, I went to meetings of the local historical society. It turned out that Cedar Cove's history was full of interesting events and personalities. On weekends, weather permitting, I went out to sea with Harvey and other fishermen. I even started helping out at the local library. They were looking for volunteers for a children's reading program, and I, to my surprise, agreed. Miriam always said I had a good voice for storytelling. The kids seemed to think so too. They listened with their mouths open as I read them stories of pirates and adventure. "You have talent, Mr. Hambleton," Sylvia the librarian said to me one day. "Children usually can't stay still that long." "Years of practice," I smiled. When my son was little, I often read to him at bedtime when I was home. I paused, suddenly thinking of Rickson. Strangely, I'd been thinking of him less and less lately. It wasn't that I'd forgotten or stopped loving him. It was just that the pain was duller, more distant, like an old wound that doesn't bleed anymore, but sometimes whines for a change in the weather. At the end of the summer, I received a letter from William Paxton, the only person from Lakewood with whom I kept in touch. We emailed occasionally, exchanging news. This time his letter contained information that made me freeze in front of the computer screen for a long time. "Hello, Mr. Hambleton. I hope you are doing well in Cedar Cove. Things are still the same here in Lakewood. The auto shop is thriving, especially with the summer vacation season coming up. I don't know if I should write about it, but thought you should know. Rickson got married last week. The ceremony was very modest, just a few close friends and Ermeline's parents. It was held in the city park, no frills. I was one of the witnesses. The Fairchilds were clearly unhappy with the modesty of the event, but seemed to accept it. After the fiasco of the first attempted wedding, they were less insistent in their requests. Or maybe Rickson has finally learned to stand up to them. It's hard to say. He asked about you. Not directly, of course, but he wanted to know if I was in touch with you, how you were settling in. I told him what I knew, that you had moved to Cedar Cove, bought a house, retired. He listened attentively, though he tried not to show interest. I don't know if it mattered, but it seemed to me that he regretted what had happened. Not enough to admit he was wrong or try to contact you, but something in his eyes changed as he listened about your new life. Anyway, I thought you should know. I hope this information doesn't disturb your peace. Best wishes, William. I reread the letter several times, trying to make sense of my feelings. Rickson had gotten married, without me, in a modest setting. No Wilhelmina banquet hall, no orchestra or ice sculptures. I wonder if it was his choice or forced by financial constraints. He was asking about me, so he hadn't completely cut me out of his life. But neither had he made any attempt to contact me, to apologize, to mend the relationship. I closed the computer and walked out onto the back porch of my new home. It was evening. The sun was setting over the horizon, coloring the sky in shades of orange and purple. Somewhere in the distance, seagulls screeched. "What do you think, Miriam?" I murmured, staring at the sunset. "Our boy got married, without either of us." There was no answer, of course, just the sound of the waves and the cries of the birds. But I could almost imagine what she would say. Something wise about children having to live their own lives, go their own way, that we can't hold their hand forever, that sometimes paths diverge, and that's okay even though it hurts. I didn't know if I would ever see my son again, whether he would have children, my grandchildren that I might never meet, whether he would be happy with Ermeline, a woman who seemed to share her parents' snobbery. Would he find his way, his true self, or would he always try to conform to other people's expectations? I hoped he would. I hoped he would be happy no matter what. After all, he was still my son, even if a chasm now lay between us that may never be bridged. The next day I went fishing with Harvey and the other boys. We went out early in the morning, when the sun was just rising above the horizon, coloring the water golden. It promised to be a good day. Clear skies, light breezes, perfect fishing conditions. "You're a little quiet today, Ejar," Harvey said as we cast our nets. "Is everything all right?" I nodded, not sure if I should share the news. But then I decided that these people had become my friends and they deserved honesty. "My son got married last week," I said. "I found out yesterday." "And you weren't invited?" Theodore, who was also with us, asked. "No," I shook my head. We have a complicated relationship. I hadn't told them the full story of the wedding fiasco, but they knew I'd moved to Cedar Cove after some conflict with my son. Ah, family, Harvey sighed. Sometimes it's the people closest to you who inflict the deepest wounds. I have a daughter, said Bill, another fisherman, usually silent. We haven't spoken in about 15 years. She thinks I've been a bad father, too strict, too distant. Maybe she's right. But you know what? Life goes on. We do what we think is right in the moment, and we live with the consequences. That's right, Theodore nodded. Sometimes relationships just end. Even family relationships. It's sad, but it's part of life. I was grateful for those words, for their lack of judgment or insistence on making up. They understood that some rifts are too deep to be easily patched. The day went great. We caught lots of fish, joked around, told stories. Back on shore in the evening, we had an impromptu dinner right on the beach. Grilled some of the catch on the grill that Harvey always carried in his pickup truck, opened a beer. Someone brought a guitar, and soon the sounds of good old-fashioned songs were blasting over the water. I sat on the sand, looking at the stars appearing in the darkening sky, and thought about the strange turns life takes. If someone had told me a year ago that I would be living in Cedar Cove, fishing with new friends and feeling more accepted and understood than I ever had in my years in Lakewood, I wouldn't have believed it. If someone had told me that my son would get married without me, and I would be, not that I'd be okay with it, but able to accept it as part of reality without collapsing in pain, I wouldn't have believed it either. But here I am. Life goes on. Not the way I planned, not the way I dreamed, but it goes on. And there is still beauty in it, in sunsets over the ocean, in friendly laughter, in simple pleasures like good fishing and a fresh catch. A week later, I received a package from Lakewood. No return address, but the handwriting on the package was familiar. William. Inside was an envelope and a small box. I opened the envelope first. There was a wedding picture of Rickson and Ermeline. They were standing under a simple archway in a city park, both smiling, but somehow demure. Rickson looked older than I remembered him, with a slight gray on his temples. Ermeline was wearing a simple white dress, a far cry from the lavish designer outfit she'd planned for her first wedding. Attached to the photo was a note from William. Rickson gave me this. Didn't ask me to give it to you, but I thought you might like to have this picture. In the box were cufflinks, old, a little worn, but familiar. They were my cufflinks, the ones I'd given Rickson when he graduated from college. I thought he'd thrown them away or lost them long ago, but apparently he kept them, and maybe he even wore them to his wedding. I stared at the picture and the cufflinks for a long time, not knowing how to react. It wasn't an olive branch. It wasn't an invitation to reconciliation, but it was something, an acknowledgement of our bond, even if it was broken, a remembrance of what had once been between us. I framed the photo and put it on the shelf next to Miriam's, not in the most visible place, but not hidden. I put the cufflinks in the box where I kept other memorabilia. Life went on. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. I found my rhythm, my place in Cedar Cove. Found new friends, new interests. Learned to live with the emptiness left by my breakup with Rickson, not filling it, but not letting it consume me either. Sometimes, sitting on the back porch of my house and watching the sunset, I thought about Miriam, about Rickson, about the life we'd had, about the decisions that had brought me here. I didn't regret my last choice to cancel my wedding payments. It was a difficult, painful step, but a necessary one. For my self-respect, for my sense of justice. Some relationships do end, even between parents and children. It's a sad truth, but a truth nonetheless. And sometimes all we can do is accept it and move on. Keep the good memories, learn from mistakes, and open your heart to new connections, new opportunities. I didn't know what the future held in store for me or for Rickson. Maybe someday, years from now, our paths would cross again. Maybe time would soften pride and resentment, allow us to see in each other not only the pain, but the love we once had. And maybe it won't, and that too will have to be faced. But now at this moment, sitting on the porch of my house in Cedar Cove, listening to the sound of the waves and the cries of the seagulls, feeling the warm evening breeze on my face, I was, not happy perhaps, but at peace with myself. I had made my choice, just as Rickson had made his. And now we were both living with the consequences. Life went on, imperfect, with voids and scars, but still worth living it fully to the last breath.